Dreamers Awake, Chapter 12. "Are you sure you're up for this?" Maggie asked as Tyler walked up to the front door. "You could reschedule, you know." "I told you, I'm fine." She seemed to be saying that a lot these days. Sleeping on the couch upstairs helped. Lydia left out the part about how she blocked the couch and TV from her view with her hand and how quickly she gathered her clothes from her room. "Besides, I want to see the city." Maggie nodded. "Well, I could take you another time." Lydia shook her head. She really wanted to get to know Tyler. She just wanted things to be normal, or as normal as they could be under her own weird circumstances. "I'd really like to see the city with Tyler," Lydia said. "Okay," Maggie said, still a bit skeptical. Maggie was grateful for the time they'd spent shopping. The feeling of relief at finally telling Lydia about Matilda had helped a lot. It really felt like they were getting closer, but she couldn't help but be concerned about Lydia's erratic behavior. Falling asleep upstairs, waking up downstairs, thinking the house was haunted. What if something happens while Lydia is out with Tyler? She tried to put it out of her mind. Tyler rang the doorbell and Lydia went to answer it. Tyler smiled when Lydia opened the door. "Hi, ready to go? The bus will be here in a few minutes. It's just down the street," Tyler said as Maggie appeared behind Lydia. "Oh, hi, Maggie." He shifted awkwardly on his feet. "Tyler, how are your folks?" Aunt Maggie asked. Lydia slipped on her shoes as they spoke. "They're fine. Same old, same old." He laughed nervously. "Lydia, we better go. Don't want to miss the bus." "Right." Lydia grabbed her bag. "Do you have the bus pass I gave you?" Aunt Maggie asked. "Yeah, thanks. See you later." Lydia waved at Aunt Maggie as she left. She had hoped that Aunt Maggie's honesty about Matilda would make her bad dreams go away, that maybe that was what made the ghost so upset. But last night had dashed her hopes. She had to get out of the house. It felt even more oppressive and bizarre since her last dream incident. She couldn't figure out how to make these horrible nightmares go away. They were really starting to take their toll on her. "Lydia?" Tyler's voice snapped her out of her reverie. "What? Geez, sorry, I was miles away. What were you saying?" Lydia asked. "Hey, is everything okay?" Tyler asked. Lydia unconsciously ran a hand through her hair, wondering if her fatigue was showing. She had noticed dark bags forming under her eyes this morning and did her best to cover them with concealer. Maybe Tyler had noticed anyway. Maybe he was trying to say she looked tired, and she suddenly felt wildly insecure. But the momentary feeling quickly passed as she told herself that isn't what he meant. Lydia took a deep breath. "Yeah, it's just weird being here. My whole life was back in California. My friends have sort of stopped texting me, and the house is just, I don't know, it's weird," Lydia said. "Well, I'd say I understand, but you know that would be a lie." Tyler paused. "I'm sorry it's been so hard for you." Lydia shrugged, trying on a smile. Tyler gestured to a metal pole with a picture of a bus bolted to it. "Here's the bus stop," he said. "Is it really that strange to be in the house? I mean, I'm sure it's difficult, but it is your family's house. I mean, your aunt is your family." Lydia nodded. "I didn't even know I had an aunt until about 3 months ago. Her and my mom didn't get along. I can kind of see why. Aunt Maggie is really different from my mom." "Siblings can be like that. My oldest brother is like 7 years older than me and is my complete opposite," Tyler said. He glanced past Lydia to see if the bus was coming down the hill. "Yeah, well, there's a lot of strange stuff going on," Lydia said. She was surprised to hear the words coming out of her mouth. Suddenly, she really, really wanted to talk to someone about what had been happening to her. It was as if Aunt Maggie sharing a little about what happened to Matilda had posed more questions than it answered. "What kind of stuff?" Tyler asked. Lydia had felt the urge to bring up the subject with her new girlfriends, but the subject of haunted houses never came up naturally in conversation. Lydia hesitated. It was the type of subject that could make a person appear crazy, and she didn't want Tyler to think she was a loony. "You can trust me, Lydia." Tyler smiled again and held out his pinky. "Here, look. Pinky swear I won't tell anyone. If I break the swear, you break my pinky." "Geez, that's a little extreme," Lydia laughed. My mom taught me, Tyler said. Your mom? Wow, what a badass woman, Lydia said nervously, not wanting to insult Tyler's mother. Mom of 4 boys. She had to be tough. Tyler waggled his eyebrows. So what do you say, pinky swear? Well, okay, but please don't spread this around. Lydia checked for the bus and lowered her voice. I've been having these horrible nightmares ever since I arrived. My room is in the basement and the second bedroom upstairs is locked. Aunt Maggie finally told me why when we went shopping last weekend. I finally learned about my cousin Matilda. Tyler looked stricken. You didn't know you had a cousin till last weekend? Tyler asked. Yeah, Aunt Maggie just didn't tell me, so I've been living with a ghost for weeks and I didn't even know it. I hoped that finally learning about her would make the dreams stop, but they haven't, which is why I'm so tired, Lydia said. At that moment, a whoosh of compressed air let them know the bus was approaching. You think the house is haunted? Tyler looked a little upset, and Lydia felt like an idiot for bringing up his dead girlfriend on their date. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been so flippant, Lydia said as the bus pulled up. Don't worry about it. Let's just head downtown. Get your pass out. Tyler went through the open doors and tapped his pass. Lydia followed suit, and they sat down in 2 of the last seats open together. Look at that, lucky us, Lydia said, trying to lighten the mood. Yep. Tyler looked out the window, then down at his hands. Lydia looked around at the other passengers, most of whom were reading or looking at their phones with earbuds shoved in their ears. The bus lurched along, making its way downtown. As it trundled along, Lydia tried a few more times to make conversation, but Tyler had become mute. He smiled tightly or shrugged. He warmed up a little as they reached their first stop. He took her to the Space Needle. They milled around the base. Want to go up? Tyler asked. Oh, no, I couldn't. Heights aren't my strong suit. Lydia smiled, staring up at the needle. All right, it's a little pricey anyway. We could check out the museum here, Tyler offered. The student discount sort of makes it worth it. What kind of museum is it? Lydia asked. It's a pop culture museum. It used to be the Experience Music Project, but they changed it to the Museum of Pop Culture, or Mopop, when the focus sort of strayed from music, Tyler said. They had started walking away from the Space Needle and in the general direction of Mopop. So there's no music there at all anymore? That's sad, Lydia said. No, there's still some permanent exhibits. I think the Jimi Hendrix exhibit is always up. They also have special exhibits. There was one on Bowie, one on Nirvana, of course. Tyler paused. I think right now there's a special exhibit on Prince. That's cool. Lydia thought it sounded okay, but they were still really close to home. She wanted to see the city, downtown, and all the historic places. They also have gaming exhibits and fantasy and sci-fi. Oh, and they have a sweet horror exhibit, Tyler started. No horror, please. Lydia tittered out a nervous laugh. Right, sorry. Tyler looked down. Want to just head downtown? Lydia felt relieved that Tyler wasn't pushing the horror exhibit. It was clear that he liked it, and she appreciated him being sensitive. Yeah, that sounds great. I really want to see some historical places and whatnot, Lydia said. Okay, but I'll warn you. The most historic areas of Seattle are a little run down these days. There's a huge drug and homelessness problem downtown that the city just can't seem to handle, Tyler said. Lydia wasn't bothered by that and said as much. They had plenty of homeless people in LA, and she was used to seeing them at least. All right, let's catch the bus then. Tyler led her to a nearby bus stop where they caught the same line they'd gotten off on. That's convenient, Lydia said. Public transit in LA is hopeless. Yeah, Seattle's not as spread out, I guess. Tyler stared at the window, but was much more conversational this time. The bus ride was significantly longer than their first 5-minute trip down the hill. They rode for about 15 minutes when Tyler finally pulled the stop cord. All right, here we are, Pike Place Market, he said. Tyler showed her around the city. He pointed out historic buildings and landmarks, location shots from movies, and shared as much history with her as he knew. He took her to a French bakery and the very first Starbucks, with a line that wound through the building and out the front door. They waited in line and got frappuccinos, then hopped on the bus again to ride a few stops down to Pioneer Square. Tyler was very comfortable playing tour guide for Lydia. She made sure not to mention Matilda or the house again. Pioneer Square was her favorite place so far. The old buildings, the architecture, even the feel of it was so historic. There were ghosts here, she was sure. The presence of so many homeless people surprised her. She had encountered homelessness in LA, but it was clear that she had had an extremely sheltered experience. To be honest, although she had boasted about being used to the homeless population in LA, there were very few in her little suburban corner of the city. Tyler, on the other hand, didn't seem bothered by them at all. In fact, he paused several times to chat with a few of them, and Lydia was surprised by the fact that the majority of the homeless folks he spoke with were much older than he was. After having a particularly long and confusing chat with one woman pulling a battered, wheeled shopping basket full of plastic bags who kept referring to him as boyo, Lydia had to ask, "So, what's that all about?" "Oh, that's Cora. She gets confused, but she's actually really sweet. She's the super intelligent academic, but she hit a rough patch after her husband died. It was just the two of them, and she got so depressed. Turned to the faithful bottle of wine a few too many times and now just can't seem to find her feet again," Tyler said. "That's really sad," Lydia said. "But how do you even know her? Do you just strike up conversations with people?" "Oh, no. I've volunteered at a shelter since I was little. My mom is a social worker. We've never really been what you'd call wealthy, so she couldn't afford childcare. She'd just bring me along. I've known Cora for almost my whole life," Tyler said. "I've been helping out at a few food banks recently, too. Been getting to know a lot of people down here." Tyler waved to a frantically flailing young man across the street. "Hey! Hey, man!" the man yelled. "Hey, Rodney, doing okay?" Tyler asked. "You know it! You know it!" Rodney did a little hop-skip, then went back to the blanket he'd been sitting on. "Poor Rodney," Tyler muttered. "That's really cool of you, Tyler. I don't think anyone else our age does that stuff. Not regularly, at least," Lydia said. Tyler looked at his feet and shrugged. "Well, you know, they're just people. Some people need support," Tyler said. "Anyway, what are we doing? Underground tour, one of my favorites. So much history. You're gonna love it." Lydia followed Tyler into the ticketing office and let him pay for their tickets. They had to wait a few minutes as more people filed in behind them and purchased tickets. There was only a small family of 3 behind them, and the tour started as soon as they had purchased their tickets. "We're lucky because it's sort of an off-season right now. During the summer, it gets packed in here," Tyler said as they took a seat for the first part of their tour. "I think it's more fun with a smaller group." The first part of the tour consisted of a short history lesson of the founding of Seattle. Lydia was fascinated by the people and events being laid out in front of her. She couldn't wait to get to the underground part of the tour. Eventually, their guide led them outside, down some stairs, and through a door that spit them out underneath the city. Lydia felt a chill run down her spine as the air cooled and the light dimmed. Hearing the history of the city before heading down definitely helped with the eerie feeling. The screams of sirens and yells from people outside faded away as the door closed behind them with an ominous click. "It's sort of creepy down here," Lydia said quietly to Tyler. He smiled at her and slipped his hand into hers. "It is indeed creepy down here," the tour guide said as she squeezed past Lydia and Tyler. "It ought to be. There are numerous ghosts down here." She continued talking about the ghosts that haunt the underground and went on to describe the room they stood inside. Lydia felt her face go pale and she squeezed Tyler's hand. "Don't worry," he muttered to her. "It's all part of the theatrics." Tyler smiled. Lydia smiled back, but couldn't help but think there might be some truth in the ghost stories. There was definitely some kind of presence down here with them. Although it was a bit of a creepy feeling, it was also exciting. They followed their group as they moved to the next section of the tour. Lydia was so enjoying the tour, the funny stories, the creepy feeling of a city underneath another city, that she had almost forgotten the ominous feeling she'd had at the start. It wasn't until the tour was nearly over and they crossed into the last room that Lydia saw her again. As she entered the room, she thought she saw a bit of movement out the corner of her eye. She did a double take, and there in the darkest corner was the ghost from her house. Her face was no longer mangled, but clear and clean. Her eyes still remained dark pits of blackness. Lydia gasped loudly and stared at the corner. Tyler looked over at her in surprise. He saw the look of terror on her face. "Lydia, what's wrong?" he asked. But Lydia was transfixed, Tyler's voice a mere echo. Matilda smiled and began to move forward ever so slowly. Her movements seemed jerky. She would move forward almost instantaneously, as if teleporting, but only in small bursts. Lydia began to breathe rapidly. Tyler started to panic. The family of 3 gave her a wide berth as they looked toward the corner that appeared to be empty to them. "What's wrong here?" the guide asked nervously as Lydia's breathing turned to hyperventilation. Lydia squeaked but couldn't move, couldn't speak as Matilda approached her. She heard people trying to speak to her, but it was all muted, as if she were underwater. The black pits in Matilda's face seemed to suck Lydia into them. She was suddenly right in front of her. "Let me go! Let me wake up!" Matilda screamed in her face, and Lydia passed out, cracking her head against the stone. Tyler had tried to catch her, but she dropped so quickly he only managed to slow her fall. He knelt next to her, shaking her shoulders and checking the back of her head for blood. He whipped out his phone, but had no service. The guide was jabbering into a walkie-talkie, and what seemed like hours later, but really was only a few minutes, 2 more employees leading 2 paramedics arrived. They secured Lydia on a stretcher and carried her off to the hospital. Tyler ran behind, calling her aunt as they went. He was lucky they let him ride along. "Are you family?" the paramedic asked as he tried to climb in after her. "No, but I've got her aunt on the phone. He paused, not sure if what he was about to say was actually true. "We were on a date. We took the bus. I can't just go home." The paramedics glanced at each other. The one who hadn't spoken shrugged as he continued to strap the stretcher into the ambulance. "All right, jump in. Don't touch anything." The paramedic scooted to the side, giving Tyler a place to sit. Maggie answered the phone as the door thunked closed. Tyler took a deep breath and told her which hospital to go to.